You don't just feel different, you feel like you were built for a completely different world. And the strangest part is, no one else seems to notice. You can sit in a room full of people, say the right things, even smile at the right moments, and still feel like there's an invisible wall between you and everyone else. Not because you don't understand them, but because you understand too much. And that's where it becomes confusing, because no one ever explains what it means when your mind doesn't stop at the surface, when your emotions don't fade the way they seem to for everyone else, when things stay with you longer than they should. So you start asking questions you never say out loud. Why am I like this? Why does everything feel heavier for me? Why can't I just be normal? But there's something about that question most people never realize. The things you're trying to fix about yourself didn't come from nowhere. They came from somewhere very specific. And once you see that clearly, a lot of what you've been carrying starts to make sense in a way it never did before. You might be the kind of person who replays conversations long after they've ended, not just the words but the tone, the pauses, the moments that didn't quite feel right. It's like your mind refuses to let things go, and maybe you've called it overthinking. But what if it's not? What if it's something your mind learned to do because once understanding people wasn't optional, it was necessary? There are environments where you don't get the luxury of taking things at face value, where what's said and what's meant are not the same, where the smallest shift in someone's voice can tell you more than their words ever could. And in those environments, you adapt. You start paying attention to everything. You read between lines that were never meant to be read. You notice what others miss, and eventually, that ability becomes automatic. So now, even when things are calm, your mind keeps searching. Not because it's broken, because it remembers. And there's another
Yes.
part of this, something quieter, but just as important. Your mind didn't just learn to think deeply, it learned to stay alert. You might feel this in your body more than your thoughts, that subtle tension that never fully goes away, even when nothing is wrong, even when everything is quiet. It's like you're waiting for something to shift, for something to go wrong, even if you don't know what. That feeling doesn't come from nowhere. It usually comes from a time when calm didn't last long enough to trust, when peace felt temporary, when your system quietly learned that it's safer to stay prepared than to fully relax. So now, even in stillness, a part of you stays awake, just in case. And here's where it gets complicated, because at the same time that you crave connection, you also pull away from it. You want to feel close to people, you want to be understood, but when things get too close, something inside you steps back, not loudly, not in a way anyone else notices, just enough to create distance. And you might have blamed yourself for that. You might have thought you're difficult or confusing or emotionally unavailable. But what if that distance isn't rejection? What if it's protection? Because when your system has learned that closeness can come with unpredictability, it doesn't matter how much you want connection, a part of you will always try to stay in control. So you don't open up too quickly, you don't depend too much, you don't let yourself get too attached. Not because you don't care, but because somewhere deep inside, you learned that caring comes with a cost, and that memory doesn't live in your thoughts, it lives in your body. You might also feel things more intensely than most people, not just your own emotions, but theirs too. Someone walks into the room carrying tension, and somehow you feel it. A small change in someone's tone stays with you longer than it should. You notice discomfort before it's even visible. And over time it becomes exhausting, because you're not just carrying your own emotional world, you're carrying pieces of everyone else's too. People call that empathy, but what they don't tell you is that empathy without boundaries becomes weight, and that weight doesn't just disappear. It settles quietly until you start to feel overwhelmed by things you can't fully explain. But again, this didn't start randomly. There was a time when understanding other people's emotions helped you stay safe, when noticing shifts meant knowing how to respond, how to avoid conflict, how to keep things from escalating. So your system learned to tune in deeply, and now it doesn't know how to turn that off. You might also feel like you notice too much about life itself, patterns, contradictions, the space between what people say and what they actually do. And while that awareness can feel like clarity, it also creates distance because once you see certain things, you can't unsee them. Once you understand certain dynamics, it becomes harder to pretend they're not there. And that makes it harder to fully belong in spaces where everyone else seems comfortable not noticing. So you start to feel out of place, not because you want to be different, but because you can't unknow what you already understand. And maybe the part that weighs on you the most is how hard you are on yourself. Not loudly, not in ways people can easily see, but in quiet, constant evaluation. Was that okay? Did I say too much? Did I do enough? And no matter what you do, there's a subtle feeling that it's not quite enough, that you should be better, calmer, simpler, easier to understand. That voice didn't appear out of nowhere. It usually grows in places where being accepted didn't feel automatic, where approval came with conditions, where you learned even subtly that you had to adjust yourself to be okay. So you became careful, you became aware, you became someone who watches themselves even when no one else is. And over time that turns into pressure, quiet, constant pressure to be more, to be different, to be right. But here's the part that changes everything if you really let it land. None of these patterns mean something is wrong with you. They mean something happened to you, and more importantly, they mean you responded. Every habit you have, every thought loop, every sensitivity, every reaction, it was your system trying to protect you, trying to make sense of things that didn't always make sense, trying to keep you steady in moments that weren't always stable. And protection doesn't always feel peaceful. Sometimes it feels like overthinking, sometimes it feels like distance, sometimes it feels like being too much and not enough at the same time. But underneath all of it, there is intelligence, there is adaptation, there is a version of you that figured out how to survive even when things were unclear, overwhelming, or emotionally heavy. And maybe no one ever told you that. Maybe no one ever explained why you are the way you are. So you tried to fix yourself instead. You tried to think less, feel less, care less, be less. But what if that was never the answer? What if the goal was never to erase these parts of you, but to understand them? Because when you understand them, something begins to shift. The overthinking starts to reveal itself as awareness. The sensitivity begins to show its roots in depth. The distance starts to make sense as protection, not failure. And slowly you stop seeing yourself as broken. You start seeing yourself as someone who adapted. And that doesn't mean you stay stuck like this forever. This is where things quietly begin to change. Not through force, not through trying to become someone completely different, but through awareness, through noticing when your mind is going too far and gently bringing it back, through feeling emotions without letting them take over everything, through allowing connection without losing yourself inside it, through creating boundaries without feeling guilty for needing them. And at first, these changes are small, almost unnoticeable, a moment where you don't overanalyze something, a moment where you let yourself rest without questioning it, a moment where you feel something and don't immediately try to explain it. They seem small, but they're not. They're how your system learns that it doesn't have to stay in survival mode all the time. And over time, something softens. Not everything, but enough for you to feel a little lighter, a little more present, a little less at war with your own mind, and maybe for the first time you start to understand something that was always just out of reach. You were never not normal in the way you thought. You were shaped by experiences that taught you to think deeply, feel deeply, and stay aware in ways most people never had to. And yes, that made things harder. Yes, it made you feel alone sometimes. Yes, it made simple things feel heavier than they should, but it also gave you something rare: depth, awareness, the ability to see and to understand. And when you stop fighting that, when you stop trying to shrink yourself into something simpler, something changes quietly. You stop asking what's wrong with me and you start asking something else. What happened to me and what do I need now? And that question, that shift, it doesn't make everything perfect, but it does something more important. It brings you back to yourself, not the version you thought you had to become, but the one that was always there underneath all the patterns, the one that didn't need fixing, only understanding. And maybe that's what normal was never supposed to be. Maybe it was never about fitting in. Maybe it was about finally seeing yourself clearly and realizing you were never the problem.